Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Today, I'm going to talk about managing stress, worry, and anxiety in difficult times. I know it's been a tough year, so some of the strategies I'm going to share with you today will hopefully help you to lessen your levels of stress and worry. Um, but at the very least, it'll be some techniques that you can carry even once we get out of this pandemic. So let's start it up. So, the first thing I want to point out is that the strategies and tips and tools I'm going to share with you are just that. They're tools, they are not solutions. And the reason why they are not solutions is because um, stress, worry, fear, anger, these are all normal human emotions. And it's impossible to eliminate those emotions, but we can manage them. So that's what today's presentation is about. It's about giving you strategies to manage these unpleasant and uncomfortable feelings, but not to eliminate them, because that's just not realistic. So here it is a acronym I came up with, and it's called breathers. So these strategies and tips that make up this acronym are found in the literature for self help. They're found in the literature for psychology and some coaching strategies as well. And they are all evidence based. And when possible, I've included um, some of the articles and studies that support the use of these techniques for managing stress, worry, and anxiety. So the techniques are breathing, relationships, exercise, attitude, thinking, hope, building hope, eating healthy, having a routine, and religion and spirituality. I'm going to go into each one of them a little more in depth. So the first thing is breathing. So B is for breathing. And the research is pretty strong on this, in that diaphragmic, I can never pronounce this word, but diaphragmatic breathing helps to lower the heart rate, lower your blood pressure, um, and it helps to cope with PTSD. So there's a lot of research on people who've been exposed to some trauma, and they're often very hypervigilant. That one of the basic techniques, or one of the simplest techniques and effective technique to start um, to lessen that state of hypervigilance, is to just get more oxygen into the body. And one of the reasons is because you need to remember that the brain needs oxygen in order to work efficiently. And when we are anxious and stressed, our brains are often going million miles a minute. We're often thinking of so many different thoughts and catastrophic possibilities. And what if this and this happens and this happens? So, one of the things, if we want the brain to just slow down, just get some more oxygen into the brain. And one of the techniques that I've been reading a lot of is this 4-7-8 deep breathing exercise. It's a variation. Everyone's got their own sort of style of deep breathing, but let's just try it right now. So, what we're going to do is we're going to inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 7 seconds, and then exhale for 8. So, that means when you're breathing in for the four, take nice deep breaths and you slowly release on the exhale. Okay, so expel all the oxygen and breathing in. 3, 4. Hold it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And exhale. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You do this a couple of times a week, a couple times a day, sorry. And you'll notice an immediate change in your body. Even I feel it right now. Just getting that oxygen, the whole body feels calm and everything seems to be working a little better. Next one, R. R is for relationships. And we all probably have some personal experience with this. But whenever we're stressed and worried, or feeling anxious, or feeling afraid about something, a very useful strategy is to talk to someone, whether it's a friend, a parent, a family member, but just having this sort of conversations is shown to improve a person's emotional state. Um, a Stress in America, sponsored by the American Psychological Association in 2015, found that people who could identify some social support said that on average their stress levels were 5 out of 10. Whereas those who did not have anyone to talk to, their stress levels were about a 6.5 out of 10. So, a noticeable difference. The other thing to keep in mind is what the research is really clear on as well is that loneliness is associated with a variety of health problems. So, people, and I want to clarify, it's the feeling of loneliness. It's not being alone. Those are two different things. Now, as I deliver this presentation in March of 2021, most of the world, we've all been dealing with a pandemic, and many parts of the world are sort of in quarantine. And so many people are living alone. But even if you live alone, you can still form relationships. You can still connect with people virtually on the telephone. Perhaps you meet with someone and you're keeping the physical distance, but it's about not feeling lonely as opposed to being alone. So there's a lot of research to support that the social support, having social support is very helpful in reducing stress and anxiety. It's also a factor in building resilience. When the resilience is the ability to sort of deal with any kind of resistance. And the research shows that if you have at least one person in your life who believes in you, who you call up when you're having a difficult time, they can at least support you and sort of cheer you on, saying, I know you can get through this. I know you can do this. Um, you are more likely to overcome some of these difficult hurdles in life. And there's an interesting study, and it happened several years ago, and it was on the University of Virginia campus. So, on this University of Virginia campus, there's a pathway that a lot of the students walk to on the way to class, and there's a hill. And so, what these researchers did was this is an actual photo from the study, is they got this device that sort of measures the slant of the hill. And as people were walking by, they would stop them and say, listen, we want you to judge how steep you think this hill is. And what they found was really interesting. What they found is that those who were walking with a friend rated the hill as less steep than those who were alone. So the people who were alone used this device and said it's this steep, but those with friends viewed it as less steep. And it proves that social support, it affects our perceptions of challenges. And I think that's such a great metaphor for when we're dealing with something difficult in life, something that's very stressful for us, is that friendships make our challenges appear less steep. A third factor is exercise. So E is for exercise. So, what the reason why exercise works in managing your unpleasant emotional states has several reasons. Number one is that it increases the the transmission and buildup of dopamine and serotonin production in the brain. Getting more blood flow, more physical activity just produces more of those feel good chemicals. The other thing is that it expends or expels, I guess, cortisol from the body. So whenever we are stressed, the pituitary gland in the brain releases cortisol. Um, and once every now and then, that's fine. But if you continue to have a regular buildup of cortisol over the long term, I'm talking years, maybe a decade or so, all that cortisol is known to harden the arteries. So what you want to do is when you feel sometimes these, that surge of of fear or of panic, uh, make sure you make some time to just expend it by doing some kind of physical activity. The other reason why it's helpful is that because it provides a timeout. Whenever we're stressed or anxious about something, we're always ruminating on that particular problem or that particular issue. But when we exercising, it allows us to actually take a mental break at the very least from the things that are bothering us. And the other thing I find, and if you found it as well, is that whenever you have a good workout, it's really difficult to remain to have the energy to even worry about certain things. Um, and more research, more and more medical professionals around the world are actually they're prescribing exercise and physical activity the way they would do other medications. And in terms of paying attention to the words we use, I also want to clarify, it's not necessarily like exercise, or you got to go to the gym and do 20 reps of some heavy weights. It's just physical activity, going for a walk up and down the stairs, doing squats at home, just keeping your body moving, doing some kind of physical activity is known to be beneficial for mental health. The next one is acceptance. So I don't know if you've had this, or if perhaps I know I'm certainly guilty of it as well, which is that um, we often stress about the things we cannot control. There are so many things that are happening, especially you know, these stressful situations that we feel very helpless in creating change. And sometimes, while we can put in some effort to make change, there's certain things we just can't control. And I found that a really good example, oftentimes, is in that serenity prayer. So, this is a prayer that they do in some of these 12-step meetings: Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Al Anon, is they'll often recite this prayer. Uh, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I bolded that last sentence there, of this prayer, or this poem, because it really does require wisdom at times to know the difference between stressing out over something we absolutely cannot change versus just sort of accepting it and then focusing on the things we can change. And I also like that first line there, about the serenity, because I think we sort of need to step back at times in order to make that distinction. Is we need to have some serenity. So, but again, the research is also pretty clear that those who have acceptance for some of these, like say a natural disaster that happens, those are able to accept it and then focus on what they can control, end up having less stress and less anxiety and less worry. And part of this is that you need to realize that change is inevitable. No matter how much we want things to remain the same, it's just impossible. So we need to accept that changes in life are inevitable. The next one is thinking. So for this one, it is all about having a balanced perspective. And I find one of the quotes that to me best captures what I mean by having balanced thinking is a quote that Mr. Rogers shared in one of his interviews. And you can go on YouTube and you can just enter that quote and you'll find the TV interview by Fred Rogers. But he said that when he was a child, he remembers seeing this really graphic images uh, on a newscast, and he was watching it on television. And I want to say it was must have been something with some firefighters. I think it was just perhaps a fire, and there was just a lot of chaos in these news clips. And he was a young child, and he told his mom, he said, Mommy, look what's on the TV. Look at the people who've died. Look what's happening. And his mother said, Fred, look out for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And I really love that quote because I think it captures that whenever we're feeling stressed, whenever we're feeling worried or anxious about something, we often focus on this sort of disaster, so to speak, of our problem. We focus on what's wrong with it. But oftentimes what we got to do is we also need to pay attention to maybe some of the good things that could come out of this. I mean, just reflect on some of your own experiences in life. I'm sure you've been in a situation where you said, Oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? There's no way I'm going to get through this. That's it. My life is over. But yet you did. And in the process of getting over it, you built up some strengths and some skills that you can use now. So just be mindful of be aware of these two perspectives and be mindful of the strengths and your past examples of when you have overcome adversity. So here's some questions to help you with that. Number one, am I jumping to conclusions? Am I really worrying and stressing out over something that I have that I don't have all the evidence about? Is this a fact or is it an opinion? Is it a fact that bad things are going to happen, or is just an opinion that we can overcome this? Is this a real worry or a hypothetical worry? And lately, I've been and speaking about COVID, I know I've been working with a few clients who've often been worried about, well, what if I catch COVID? What if, what if I catch it and I get really sick and my children are going to starve? And what if I die? And all these things that are actually hypothetical. They haven't even happened. But perhaps a real worry, however, is, do I have enough food in the refrigerator? Um, do I have enough clothing? Or are we okay? Those are some of the real concerns that we need to focus our attention on and not spend energy worrying about things that have not yet happened and probably or unlikely will. Another question is going back to what I said in the previous slide. What have I learned about myself from past personal challenges that I can use now? The next one in breathers is hope, building hope. So again, this comes from the research in building resiliency and in post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic growth has to do with that, the findings that when something bad happens to people, when a traumatic event happens, most of us actually become stronger as a result of it. So from the trauma, we actually grow. And one of the factors that contributes to that growth is hope. So hope, the definition, is a feeling, right? So we got the sensation, a feeling of expectation and a desire and a cognitive piece here for a certain thing to happen. It's a feeling of trust. So people who have hope tend to have reduced trauma symptoms over the long term. Uh, and it contributes to their post-traumatic growth, as I mentioned earlier. So, how do you build hope? Well, one way you can build hope is to focus on your strengths. What are the kinds of adversities you've faced, and what did you learn about it? Um, that you've built a strength in overcoming challenges and difficult times. Another way is to just reframe your thoughts. Again, looking at things in a more balanced perspective. And another tip in building hope is to spend time with hopeful people. You've heard the expression "misery loves company." Well, it's very true. Sometimes when we're sad and we hang around people who are always sad and negative and pessimistic, that we actually start to adopt some of those attitudes ourselves. So, if you want to build hope, spend it with people who have these opinions and these viewpoints that you value and you also want to build within yourself. Next one, eating right. It's pretty simple here. Food changes mood. And a perfect example is if, you have a nice big pasta meal with, crusty bread and, and some soda alongside and all this sugar, and you're going to feel depressed. Now, I'm not saying you'll develop a depressive episode in the clinical terms. No, I don't mean that at all. But what I do mean is that some of the foods that we eat um, can quickly make us feel, bloated. We feel sluggish and tired. We have no desire to get off the couch. But these are some of the things that people with depression also are living with, that they're trying to get away from. So, what you want to do when you're feeling stressed and anxious is you want to make sure you're avoiding the foods that make you sort of feel low and lethargic. Similarly, if you're also dealing with anxiousness, minimize the caffeine because we do know that lots of caffeine is just going to make you more jittery. It's going to increase your heart rate. It's just going to make you feel just a lot more shaky, which is exactly what anxiety is all about. You talk about people who've been living with it and they'll tell you their mind is racing, their heart is racing, their knees are wobbling. Well, pump yourself with a whole bunch of caffeinated drinks and you will also mimic some of those very same symptoms. So just cut that down when you're dealing with one of these unpleasant emotional states. Poor diet worsens the mood disorders, and the research shows that a diet rich in vegetables and olive oil protects against depression and anxiety. So I think you can sort of Google octogenarians. There was a book, I think it's called The Red Zone. I can't remember, but it's about a study on the people who've lived the longest here on Earth. And what they will tell you is that there are regions in the world, and the one thing that's consistent with those who have a long life and those who have reduced anxiety and depression, therefore better quality of life, are those who have particular diets. So watch what you eat to manage those feelings. The last one is routine, and a lot of this now comes from some of the research, over mostly in dealing with children. So what happens when there's, let's say, a natural disaster, a hurricane, a flooding, or in tragically, a school shooting, and you get a lot of kids who are very anxious, very fearful of returning. So one of the things that is shown to be helpful is to put the child back into routine. And we as adults benefit in the same way, getting back to a regular uh, routine of sleep, regular routine of exercise, of our eating habits. So even when you are feeling stressed and anxious, do what you can to get back to a normal routine. It'll put you on automatic pilot, and it'll help you to just have more control over the emotions rather than having the emotions control you. And the last one has to do with spirituality. And again, the research, again, it's pretty clear on this, is that people who seem to have some kind of religious beliefs, but not only just sort of religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs and practices, it seems to be serving as a type of protective factor against depression, anxiety. So in reading some of the things in this area, I find that it's important to separate between the beliefs and the practices. So when we look at the beliefs, one of the things we find is those, and again, regardless of religious, the religion the person is practicing, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, is that it seems to help people to cope with adversity. Uh, Secondly, is that when you belong to let's say, a religious community, it actually provides you with that social support that I mentioned earlier on under the R. And thirdly is that there's some thinking that changes, is that it helps you to reframe your thinking. So that has to do with some of the beliefs. But in terms of the practices, again, what's common in all of these religious traditions is that um, followers often have these practices where they're going to meditation, they're spending time in solitude, they're spending time in prayer, or in just sort of focusing just on the moment. Um, and additionally, they're reflecting a lot of times on these sort of guidelines for living. And that last point there about the guidelines for living, that might be more about around the beliefs subcategory. But in terms of the practices, again, things like yoga or people or prayer, quiet prayer, or just spending time in nature, things that are sort of falling into this category of spiritual practices are known to reduce anxiety, reduce stress, to build hope, and it helps a person to view adversity much more differently in a more positive way. And so there you have it. You have breathers. And over here is I have some references for some of the things I discussed. Hope you found this presentation helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.